everybody and welcome back to my channel. I am Sam, I'm an artist and illustrator and of course an aspiring knitting designer based in Ireland. And today I would like to share with you what is my process around designing new knitting patterns, what steps I follow and what tools I'm using. As I mentioned, I am an aspiring knitting designer. I have started knitting a few years ago now, and I always had the urge of creating my own patterns. I have already several patterns published on Ravelry, and you can find them in my Ravelry page, and all the links are below in the description. But during these few months on designing patterns, I've noticed very few stages that I'm following over and over. And today I would like to share them with you. So the first stage that I always start with when designing a new knitting pattern is actually gathering ideas. Try to find inspiration and create a sort of a mood board for the final design. To do so, I tend to use different tools like browsing Pinterest or images on the internet or indeed books. If I'm lucky enough, I go outside and I try to gather inspiration from the real world, but of course that can't happen all of the time. All of my patterns are inspired by nature, by architecture and by art. So having a visual reference helps very much with this process. During this step, I always sketch down my ideas. I try to make a reference through watercolors or color pencil, as well as experimenting a little bit with color combinations and shapes, patterns, and all of that will come eventually a design. The color piece is probably my favorite, being myself an artist as my primary hobby, I would say. I find always very challenging, but as well really interesting and fulfilling to be able to play a little bit with color, especially in something that then I create. The second stage will be probably the more complicated stage, which is doing the math. I am not a mathematician and I suck at math in school, so it's very challenging for me, but it is absolutely necessary. Doing the math means understand what type of gauge you want on your piece, what type of fabric eventually you would like, what is the pattern if you are working in color work or lace, and of course the shape of the garment. In this case, I am working on a pair of socks, so will be the shape of the cuff and as well of the heel, and of course the toe itself. I am always trying to give a few sizes to my patterns, so at this stage working with an hypothetical gauge and trying to figure out different sizes helps very much then in the steps forward. For this step I use several tools, like these books here. These are basically dictionary for stitch patterns, for pattern writing, and to just gather ideas about colors, combinations, color work, and as well shapes, of course. I find that my library is growing day by day with these amazing tools, and I warmly recommend to get at least a couple of knitting dictionaries if you kind of want to start getting into creating your own pattern. These are absolutely invaluable. When the math is done, I am going through the more annoying stage of all, which is swatching. If you follow my podcast or my channel, you know that I so seldom swatch. I absolutely think it's a waste of time and resources. But of course, if you are creating a pattern, especially for sale, you really want to get everything spot on. So I always swatch. I tend to swatch following the actual idea of the garment I'm creating or the accessory. In this case, I'm creating a sock pattern, so I will swatch in the round using the same needle that I will eventually use at the end for the final work. Helps very much to get the gauge decided beforehand, so now you have time to choose the right size of needle, to change the right size of needle, and to understand how the fabrics will look like, if the color work, if the pattern as written works well, and to get an idea of all the changes you want to make and do. In this case, for example, I decided to go down a needle size and raise very much the gauge, so that I will get a more sturdy and tight fabric, which is not the choice in my sock pattern always, but it's something completely different and will get a very different fabric. The fourth stage will be knitting a sample. The sample is vitally important for me to understand what the final work will be, and as well to take a couple of preliminary photos to be shared with my tech editors. Tech editing is part of this stage more or less. I always decide to send my pattern to an editor. First of all, because English is not my first language, and therefore I need someone to check my patterns, English-wise, and grammars and spelling. And as well, I am not a knitting designer by trade, so I would need someone to put an eye on my math, on my gauge, on my measurement, on the sizes that I kind of wish my pattern has, and all of these specifics that need to be 100% right at the end of the day. Tech editing can be quite expensive and can be really challenging if you, like me, are an aspiring knitting designer. Therefore, the income that you get from your pattern is really minimal, and you end up spending a huge amount of money on editing. But still, the final work that you will produce is so much more of a high quality and, will help going forward, I really hope. Back from the tech editor, my pattern will be almost ready to go. A further step that I always do. I know that this is not regular with knitting designers, but I always tend to send my pattern to a couple of test knitters. I like the idea of people choosing different colors. I like the idea of seeing real knitters' feedback as well. This helps a lot. And of course, I like the possibility of learning within the community that test editing is creating a little bit. After I receive the feedback from my testers, I always go back to my tech editor. And I'm so very lucky that my tech editor is willing to recheck the pattern afterwards, which is really great. Because I'm telling you, always you get so much more out of test knitting that you could get on a pure and simple tech editing. And that's basically it. Afterwards, I tend to rework the pattern and redesign the file for the Ravelry page, and as well knit a pair of socks for myself, or of course a garment. I really hope this was of some use for you. If you are a designer as well and you follow different steps, please let me know. I'm always looking to improve my designing flow, and I'm always looking to deliver the best possible pattern, designs, and something that I could be really proud of going forward. I really hope you are okay and keeping safe, and I wish you a very wonderful week. I'll see you probably next week with my podcast, And of course, you can find all of my links below in the description, or just look out for Irish Farm Art. I'm basically everywhere. Have a lovely week. Bye bye.